I just wanted to say thank you again for joining this webinar, where we're going to go through basically what site reliability engineering is, why anybody should care, and if you're interested in it in terms of career and moving forward, then kind of the steps that you can take in order to move that forward for yourselves. This is kind of what we're going to cover in this particular session: the case for SRE, like I said, why anybody should care, the principles that guide it, the skills of an SRE, an example Workday so you can see what it actually means to be an SRE in a working environment, AI, what's the future? Should anybody even bother still being an SRE? DevOps or SRE? There's a question that comes up quite a lot, right? Like, what's the difference between DevOps and SRE? The path into SRE, job applications, learning and certs, and then finally Q&A. So there's quite a bit to get through, but let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to try to make the case for SRE to start off with. I want you to consider a time that you've been on your favorite app, or you have been trying to access a website and it hasn't been complying, right? It hasn't been responding the way that you expect. Perhaps the website is very slow. Perhaps every time you try to click on something, you're getting an error, right? That kind of frustration there over extended periods of time causes problems between the end user, you, and the person who's supposed to be providing this service, right? That level of unreliability means that you are no longer happy. And the moment somebody is no longer happy, they're less likely to stick around. It typically looks something like this, right? You attempt to access an application, it's unreliable, it's unresponsive, you're frustrated, and you leave. And obviously that is not good for any service provider. But it can be a lot more serious than that. Now let's think about a situation in terms of healthcare. Think about an application that is used to store patient information, right? And the system goes down, the medical staff can't access that data. The consequences of something like that could be completely unacceptable, right? It could mean that they can't do the work that they need to, they can't treat the patients in the way they're supposed to, or perhaps they treat the wrong patient or administer the wrong medical care. Again, it's unacceptable. There are severe consequences to an unreliable system, and here is where the case for the SRE becomes or is made. Customer dissatisfaction, which we've already spoke about, brand damage. If people know that they can't trust you, even with a website or an app, why would I trust you in terms of spending my money or my time with you? Revenue loss, of course, loss of trust among stakeholders. So if they're seeing that you can't keep your systems reliable, then they start to lose confidence in you and your ability to execute, as you said. Innovation stifling. If all you're trying to do is keep your systems from failing, then you don't have time to innovate, right? Which has an impact on employee morale because they feel like they're just putting out fires effectively all the time. And there's also issues around regulation and compliance. This is from the Google SRE workbook, but if users don't trust a system, given the choice, they won't use it. So this is where SRE comes in. The origins of SRE can actually trace back to Google in the early 2000s, and the first official SRE team, if you like, existed under a man called Ben Sloss. The intention was to bridge the gap between development and system operations in order to create a reliable system. Right, so using effectively software engineering principles, things like how do we architect reliable applications that are fit for purpose, that are appropriately have testing behind them, but also with systems engineering. So how do we create the infrastructure around our applications in order for them to be reliable, scalable, right, so that they can meet the demand of our users? And it's this combination that allowed SRE to be born. So whilst it started off in big tech and places like Google, it's now found its way into a range of other industries, right? So there are finance SREs, SREs in e-commerce applications, even in education. They are far spread or widespread now. Now, I know a big reason people are interested in SRE is the money, right? And compared to a lot of other roles in tech, it is well compensated. These are just the averages for, I want to say an entry level, but like a mid-level SRE, £94,000 in London, 150,000 in New York. And it scales up quite a lot. Like the more senior you become, whether you're senior SRE now, lead SRE, the money can increase quite a lot. And especially if you're working in big tech and SRE in somewhere like Google or AWS, we're talking now into the couple hundred thousands. But the point that I really want to get across here is there is a reason why SRE is a well-compensated role. And it's because it's so dynamic and because the skill set is so broad. And I hope that will become clear in this. And sometimes you will be dealing with high pressure systems. It's not always nice when things go down and you don't know what to do, or it's down to you to work out what's gone wrong and how we can get things up and running as quickly as possible. So yes, there is some good money to be made, but it is not all roses. So now that I hope I've kind of made the case for why SRE is important and why they exist, let's kind of dive deeper into like the principles. So what is backing then SRE? And I'm going to categorize it into these 6 principles, and hopefully, again, how SREs are able to execute what it is they're supposed to be doing. The first one is reliability first, automation, monitoring, alerting, embracing risk, the service level model, and collaboration. So let's talk about reliability first. Reliability is the most important feature. That is what backs everything that SREs do. This fundamental belief that there is no point in you creating a new widget, a new feature. Somebody can download new videos on your platform if the platform is unreliable. If every time the user tries to click on something, they aren't getting the experience they expect, well, then it doesn't matter how shiny your new widgets are effectively. And this is what guides SREs. Reliability is at the forefront of our minds. The second one, though, is automation. Another quote that you might hear is that the job of an SRE is to automate themselves out of a job. Like, probably not too much because we still want to be here and get paid, but the underlying premise is that we're trying to eliminate toil. That is any manual task that takes away from precious engineering time and resources that we could be spent innovating and making our applications and systems better in a different way. An example of this may be automating the backup of your database. The third principle then is monitoring and alerting, and this is a huge part of SRE. Effectively, you can't have a reliable system if you don't know what's going on in your system, right? Or if by the time you know something's going wrong, the fire's already spreading. And this is where monitoring and alerting come into place, right? We can see into our systems and then we can make decisions, a data-driven approach to system management. Then there's this concept of embracing risk. Now, the point, surprisingly enough, is not 100% reliability, because we have to accept that in order to innovate, in order to develop and move an application or a platform or whatever our system is forward, we'll have to try things that we haven't previously tried. And with that comes some level of risk. So SREs are there, they're not only responsible for getting the system back up and running when things go wrong, but facilitating an environment where people feel like, you know, we can try things, but we have our systems in place for that when things go wrong, whether it's in dev, whether it's in QA, or whether it is in production, we know what to do and we know how to respond. And then comes the service level model. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this because this is perhaps the most defining factor in SRE, or the thing that you will see quite a lot in SRE related resources. And this is the idea of the service level model that is comprised of SLOs, SLIs, and error budgets. Effectively, we are taking a service level approach to management and to operations. And what this means is if we look at something like an online store, right? Something like this, where perhaps we allow customers to purchase books. We could look at this as one big system, but that probably isn't the most effective way to look at this, because there is a service that may be dealing with the account. So people logging in or people signing up. That has a very specific requirement and perhaps different response times, different error rates. Our order service, where people are putting things in their basket and checking out, will be different. And then shipping will be different. So by taking a service level approach, we can serve the requirements of each service as is required. And so how do we do this? This is where the SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs will come in. So an SLA is just a formal agreement between the service provider and the customer. It basically says you can expect us to meet this standard, and if we don't, this is what's going to happen. But what are those standards? Well, that's what the SLO is. Those are the objectives or the requirements that you agree to meet. But if we say something like, you can expect my system to be 99% available, what does that mean? How would I as an SRE track that the system was available? What metrics would I use? And that's where SLIs come into place. I may look at something like response codes from people clicking on the website. How many times when somebody goes to click, are they having a successful experience or a negative experience? And again, it comes back down to this idea that different systems have different needs. And as an SRE and in SRE, this is kind of at the core, right? And that we are not trying to approach things in a one size fits all. And, you know, we're just going to apply this blanket statement to everything. We have to assess the systems that we're working with, the services that we're working with, and address those unique needs, those unique characteristics. Even if I took this to a higher level, if you thought about an e-commerce web application like that one that we just saw that allows you to purchase books, the requirements of that are going to be very different from a financial reporting application where the end product is a result of a data pipeline. I might be more interested in things like data availability. Is the data available at 8 o'clock when the financial team need to see it? Or perhaps data accuracy. Is the data that they're getting accurate? And the final principle then is collaboration. So SREs don't work in a solo capacity. We interact with development teams. We interact with other stakeholders, the system engineers. SRE is not a solo endeavor, right? And it's not great to be an SRE in a place where others don't believe in the principles that are guiding you. And so some of your job, a large part of your job, is to kind of be an ambassador for SRE in whatever organization that you work in. So those are the principles, but let's kind of get more into the nitty gritty of the skills of an SRE. Like, what does it take to be an SRE if this is the kind of job that you wanted? You're interested in what the SREs in your company do. It's a very rolled and it's quite complicated to explain, but the job will depend on the organization that you're in. Because people adopt this idea of SRE and interpret it differently, you can see variations in SRE roles in this company and that company. But at a very high level, I think we can split it into subject matter expert and things that you need knowledge of. So in terms of a subject matter expert, you will need to know SLOs, SLIs, and error budgets. And this is, again, a defining factor of SRE role. But you'll also need to be an expert in monitoring and alerting. Can you set up good and effective monitoring systems and alerting systems? Nobody wants to be dealing with an alerting system that is so noisy that everybody just ignores it. That's almost as bad as having no alerting system at all. You're going to hear me talk about data-driven decisions quite a lot. Effectively, everything we're doing behind monitoring and alerting is to collect data so that we can make decisions, and not decisions that are based on feelings, like I feel that we should do this, but that these are the reasons. This is the data on our application performance, on our infrastructure performance. Automation. So leading back to that principle of automating everything or eliminating toil. We want to be using the tools at our hand, whether we are scripting with Python or whether we're using infrastructure as code, things like Terraform or CI/CD. How are we automating the steps that are involved in keeping the system reliable so that we can work on other things? Incident response. So a part of being an SRE is being on call often, which means if things go down, if the system goes down, you will need to respond. Finally, we have cloud computing. If you're going to be an SRE in a cloud environment, you are not going to be able to escape the need to understand what the cloud is and the services that are there. It's very hard to architect and support a reliable system in the cloud without any cloud background. And then we have troubleshooting and back to designing reliable systems. There are things that you don't necessarily need to be an expert in, but you definitely need knowledge of. The first being networking. And the reason why this is so important is because often the issue or the source of your issue you may be dealing with may be a networking issue, right? Perhaps the reason your application isn't working is because of something to do with the layers of networking. Something's gone wrong somewhere, and you need to be able to at least decipher that this is a networking issue. You don't necessarily have to be a networking engineer, because that in itself is a whole career path that can get very deep. But you do need to understand the basics of networking. CI/CD pipelines, again, this is something that you'll find more in DevOps. You don't necessarily have to be able to build the perfect CI/CD pipeline from start to finish in terms of an application, but you do need to be confident in that you understand what CI/CD is, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment or delivery, depending on who you ask. You need to understand why we're using it, why it may be in the organization that you're in. Containers, this is something, again, if you're working a containerized environment, then of course, knowledge of containers will be more important. If you're not, for example, I don't particularly work in containerized environments at the moment, so my knowledge of that isn't as necessary. Application testing, you don't need to be an application tester to the highest degree, but you do need to understand what tests are and why they're there and why we use them. Why do we care? And finally, security. I mean, this is imperative in all really people in an organization that are dealing with IT and applications and platforms should have this idea of security in their back of the mind, or really at the front of their mind at all times. With everything you're doing, is this a secure step? Am I putting the data or our platform at risk? So you will need to have knowledge of security at the different steps and the different touch points that you'll have as an SRE. And so as you can see, it is a very broad role, which is why it typically isn't an entry-level role. But now let's talk about some of the soft skills. I put them in the quotes, but I actually think the soft skills are incredibly important as an SRE just because of how broad it is. So the whole communication element, super important. You're going to be dealing with different stakeholders, different parts of the company. And if you don't know how to communicate your ideas effectively, you're going to struggle. Problem solving, you're going to be dealing with different issues. Like today it might be a networking issue. Today it might be an issue related to your servers and capacity. Can you put the pieces of the puzzle together in an effective time in order to get the system back up to the state that we expect? Organization, again, you may be dealing with different tickets or different pieces of work at the same time. Can you organize and prioritize yourself effectively in order to get your work done? You need to really believe in measurements and data-driven decisions, because you will be a stronger SRE and the platforms that you support will benefit from this way of thinking. And then finally, you need to have a desire to evolve. This is not a job where you stagnant and, you just sit back, nothing changes, that's it. If you're not prepared to evolve, the SRE role will leave you behind effectively. Just thinking about all those touch points I spoke about, any one of them is moving so fast right now, right? Even if we don't even get into perhaps even AI and the implications of that, that if you're not willing to take an interest in those evolutions, you will suffer. Sounds a bit intense. I don't mean like suffer, that's a bit much. But so let's go through an example workday just to set the scene. So you get in the morning as an SRE. Let's consider this time to get settled. Perhaps you go in and you check your monitoring systems. You make sure that nothing was missed overnight, that the system is stable, that it's reliable, and that everyone's happy. Next, perhaps you respond to some emails. Perhaps you've been getting some emails from the devs about some work. You've been working on them with improving application logging and so forth. So you check and respond to those. Then you review some of the work that you've been working on for the last week, maybe some active work, maybe there's some pending work that's come in. And then you may attend your morning stand-up, which is just your morning meeting in tech. In the afternoon, you might do some more focus work, some more deep work, where your primary task could be setting SLOs, like we just spoke about. Perhaps in the afternoon, you have a meeting with the rest of the SRE team to discuss cost optimization, right? How you can reduce the cost of, say, your AWS environment while maintaining a reliable system. And then finally, excuse me, in the afternoon, you may be working on other tasks, such as automating some work. But then it's not over, because if you are on call at this point, that at 5 o'clock, you don't sign off, right? And you're not on call all the time as an SRE, unless you're in I don't want to say dysfunctional environment, but one where the pressure is very high and the resources are low. But typically it'll be spread out. Maybe you'll be on it every week, every 6 weeks. But at this point, you are there to make sure that if any alerts go off in the night or over the weekend, there is somebody ready to respond. You're there to assess the situation, whatever that issue is, collect information and take immediate action. Now, at this point, it's not about having the most elaborate response where you've automated everything. Right now, at this point on call, it's about stabilizing the system, right? It's not about the most, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't matter how shiny the action is that's taken, so long as you've secured and stabilized the system. And then you document the necessary information. It's not about getting a post-mortem or a very extensive incident report. You just need to document the necessary information so that in the morning, when you go back to the team, you can write up your reports and your post-mortems. So that's that. Now let's go a little bit deeper, a little bit further into the future and talk about the ways that AI is interacting with SRE and what that means for us. So AI, artificial intelligence, is becoming increasingly embedded into the tools that we use as SREs, right? It's changing kind of the way that we operate. And the biggest way is in simplifying SRE tasks. So there are 3 ways I think we can identify that generative AI in particular is impacting SRE teams. The first one is coding assistance, things like GitHub Copilot or AWS Code Whisperer. Because we may be writing code, we may be writing scripts in order to automate some work, or we may be writing a Terraform file or set of files. These coding assistants can help us. They can help predict what we're going to write next, or they may be able to write the tests for the code that we're writing and cut down the time that we have to spend on things like that. Also, though, the problem solving and guidance element of it. So we can ask things like ChatGPT or even Amazon Q more recently about complex issues to break down challenging concepts. And if these things have access to your data, which is something that we have to consider, because a lot of the time you don't want to be putting sensitive and proprietary data into these systems, but there are ways of getting around it where you can just ask more general questions about complex ideas and still get that kind of step-by-step breakdown, and then you can apply it. It's not about replacing the SRE by just giving all your data to these things and just seeing what happens. It's about using it, again, as an assistant right now. And the final way is in automated analysis, so leveraging AI for predictive analysis. If we give these models access to our data in certain environments, which have been signed off from your company and it's passed the necessary security and compliance checks, something like that we have in AWS, we can use them to predict how our systems will work in the future, or capacity issues like, your application usage is likely or projected to increase by tenfold. So you may want to change your server sizes or the amount of servers you've deployed or your database structure in order to meet these expectations. This is just one example from something called Datadog. So Datadog is a monitoring tool or an observability platform, one of the most popular, say, in the SRE kind of space. And they have something called Datadog Bits AI. So here you can query effectively your observability platform, your monitoring platform, and ask it questions in natural language. So in the way that I'm speaking to you right now, I can just speak to it instead of writing like a complex query or code in order to try to draw this information out. In this case, she said, are there any issues with the event processor dependencies? And it's given an answer. It's showing you about the triggered alerts that are linked to it. And it's allowing you to click through and get more information there. And so that's just the tip of the iceberg, really, with what's going on with AI. So DevOps or SRE? This is a question that comes up quite a lot. And it's because there's quite a lot of overlap between the two roles. I hope it's kind of become clear that SRE is about achieving high reliability and availability, and that we use things like SLOs in order to ensure that we're meeting these system requirements and that we're minimizing downtime. DevOps, at its root, was more of an approach, more of a methodology or an idea about how we should approach IT applications and so forth, that we reduce or actually completely break down the silo between development teams and operation teams. It has evolved in its own role, and you'll see the engineering role come up quite a lot. Some of you may even be DevOps engineers, but there's a heavy reliance on automating and streamlining the process of getting things from development and ideas and plans that we have all the way into production. How can we streamline this process? So that may seem quite wishy-washy, and so like, I'm still not convinced. So I think it's probably helpful for us to kind of do a comparison of some of these aspects of the two. So where the primary focus, like we said, with SRE is reliability and minimizing downtime, with DevOps, it's about efficiency, it's about automation along the software development lifecycle. Measurements, we're interested in SLIs, SLOs, and error budgets as SREs, whereas DevOps engineers or DevOps in general may be more interested in pipeline metrics, things like pipeline failure rates, right? Or the time taken for the pipeline to complete. In terms of error handling, we do things like error budgets in SRE. We're very much wanting control changes for the most part. DevOps typically has this philosophy of fail fast, basically. So you fail fast, but you recover fast. Collaboration is huge in both. Almost a missed automation, super heavy in both, as you could probably tell. In terms of the culture, I'd say the focus in SRE is really an end user focus, like above everything else, above even really the developer experience and all these things, although they do tie in effectively to the end user, is how is the person at the end of my application, at the end of my platform, experiencing this? I think with DevOps, it's a little bit more broad in the sense of we very much care about the developers and the operations, and in terms of the life cycle, are we improving their experience in order to streamline the process? That's not to say that they don't care about the end user, because effectively everything that we're doing as a unit is for them, but just the way that we approach things may be different. And in terms of speed, reliability over anything else, like we've said. So we may want to stabilize things. Like there are times when the SREs will say to dev, no more change, nothing else gets pushed out, no more widgets, no more anything, no more upgrades, no more nothing. The system is not reliable. We can't do anything else until we get things back up and running. Ultimately, it's going to depend who you ask. You could ask someone else the same question that I just answered, and they will have a completely different answer for you. The key thing is when you are looking for SRE jobs or you're interested in it is to make sure we're having conversations and check out the job descriptions. They will typically give you more detail about it than just SRE DevOps engineer. Sometimes they overlap quite a lot, and you see that people, this is labeled an SRE job, but I think they actually want a DevOps engineer, or vice versa. So now let's talk about the path to SRE. Like, how do you become an SRE depending on where you are? There's no single route into SRE. And the reason is because the skill set is so broad, right? You've seen from the things that we've covered so far that SREs have a range of skills and a range of experiences. But that means that people from different areas of tech can flourish in the role. However, there are some roles that lend themselves towards moving into SRE. Quite obviously, and probably the top of the list is DevOps engineer. Because of the sheer overlap in the skills that we have and the experiences we have, DevOps engineers have a natural transition, natural path to SRE. But also software developers and software engineers. As we spoke about at the beginning, SRE is about bringing those software engineering principles and those system engineering principles. So if you already have the software engineering side, you've been building reliable code and building optimal code and tests for that code and integrating them into these systems, and you're already coming with that to the table. But also support engineers, specifically second line. There's also a natural progression from a support engineer to a second line because you have been at the forefront troubleshooting in the incidents, handling issues. You kind of have that element of SRE that you can bring. And then, of course, security and cloud engineers, for similar reasons, you have things that you can bring to the table. I actually just wanted to draw out these real paths that I saw when I was looking on LinkedIn. I've kind of redacted some of the information because I'm like, oh yeah, Adam has been spreading your business, even though it's on a public platform. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that like these are the real paths of people to SRE. In this case, they were a software engineer first. This person then became a DevOps engineer, platform, and then made their way to site reliability engineering. This person didn't take like a detour in DevOps. They just went from software to site reliability engineer. This person was a design engineer, then a technology analyst, and then became an SRE. And every so often, and it's not that common, you get somebody who has a junior SRE position or an associate SRE. So actually their first job or their first kind of job out of uni was a junior SRE position. But like I said, these are rarer. So let's now kind of go through one of these or a few of these example paths. If you're coming from DevOps, you already have things under your belt like CI/CD, like scripting, IAC, cloud architecting to an extent, potentially even some observability. Perhaps you've built out some monitoring tools or it's been integrated in the Terraform writing. You might have some OS administration skills, so like Linux administration or Windows. And you may even have some container knowledge. All of this will be valuable and allow you to build upon for the SRE position. So your next step then is going to be getting those SRE principles under your belt. Things like the service level model, designing reliable systems and focusing in on that, the data-driven decisions, and then observability and alerting when you're in production and the continuous refinement of that. Then you're probably going to layer on some things like the incident management stuff we spoke about, troubleshooting, triaging, blameless postmortems, and then effectively, and at the end, you're going to wrap this all up in your attitude and skills towards things, this end user focus, which I keep speaking about because it really is at the heart of what we do. If you're a software engineer, it might be slightly different because you've come now with your programming skills, your application testing skills, application design. If you've been writing good logs, hopefully for the sake of us in support and on the other side in production, you've been doing some good logging as well and high level design. So again, for you, the next level may be SRE principles, but you probably don't have as much experience in things like cloud and automation, like a DevOps engineer. So you're going to need to spend some more time there. And things like I said, CI/CD and things like Terraform. And as always, the attitude and skills. And finally, if you're coming from something like second line support, then you have experience in troubleshooting and triaging, incident management, things like networking, maybe even bash scripting. So your next level is going to be then cloud and automation. Like we said, the architecting, things like Terraform. Finally, you're going to layer on your SRE principles on top of that, things like the service level model and observability. So you can kind of see how you can come with, like, it's not about, oh, I'm starting from scratch as an SRE. It's that whatever you've been doing, especially if you're coming directly from an IT background, will help you as an SRE. So now let's talk about then job applications and what that looks like if you are thinking about applying for an SRE position. I've just kind of emphasized this, but I really, really want to drill in that. In your application process for becoming an SRE, you're going to convey the value you already bring. If you are a DevOps engineer, if you've been support, if you've been a software developer, if you've been a security analyst, convey that value. Do not try to pretend that that hasn't happened, lean into that. But then you're going to layer your understanding of SRE on top of that and anything that you've been working on, any projects, anything you've taken on at work to kind of level you up. And then finally, the willingness to learn and the willingness to evolve. So the first thing you're going to get hit with when you're applying for SRE jobs is the job description. And as I've alluded already, they vary quite a lot. And I'm going to show you some of them actually so you can see how they vary and how you can make sure that you're applying for a job that you actually want to do versus something else where like they actually want a Python developer with SRE sprinkled on top, but they don't want to say it. So here is one that we can look at now. So in terms of what you'll be doing, these are the ones, by the way, from LinkedIn. Collaborate with a diverse team to design and implement robust systems. That makes sense with what we've been talking about before. Reliability and scalability initiatives. Again, that aligns with what we've been saying. Refining our observability frameworks, empowering the engineering team with the collaboration and monitoring here. Coding prowess to automate and streamline, and then 24/7 on call. So this is a SRE job description that actually maps quite well to the SRE principles. They're not all like this, but this is a great one when you see it. And in terms of who you are, proficiency in AWS and GCP, so that's cloud, automation, Python, CloudFormation, Terraform, something of your choice. They've kept it quite open here, which is always good when you see ones like that. Detail, troubleshooting and observability, and then communication. So you can kind of see that this is almost a textbook SRE role, but they're not all like that. This one is a little bit more networking focused, and this may reflect the needs of their particular system or the things that they're having issues with. So it's responsible for operations at enterprise level, which is effectively they want to make sure that you're not coming from absolutely no background at all, that you're able to deliver tools and software to improve reliability and scalability, provide on-call support, incident response, and collaborate with engineers. So some of these things are similar to what we've seen before. This one, though, in terms of qualifications, is saying things like bachelor's degree in computer science. I totally just, if you've got experience in tech, I just think you can usually just write this off for the most part. Experience typically trumps whatever degree you have in tech, so long as you've been doing quality work. But it does want you to make sure that you've mastered one of the programming languages under Linux. So in this case, Python, Go. And this is where the networking stuff seems to be more important in this particular job, because they've spoken about it, they've declared it quite clearly. Understanding of network protocols and relative services, DNS, load balancers, and hands-on OS experience. And this final one that I want to show you, we don't need to go through it specifically, but I just want to highlight to you that SRE is moving with the times. This is a job description from an AI-first company. If you've heard of Anthropic and the Claude model, which is Anthropic is a alternative to OpenAI and ChatGPT, if you'd like, they have a job description up, a job available for SRE, and it's a lot of the things that we've seen. They've actually explicitly said Kubernetes because they are obviously working on in a containerized environment, but that same stuff is coming up: troubleshooting, monitoring, automation, resource allocation, deployments. These things are still there. It's now just applied to a new platform, a new system. So after, and once you've decided where you're going to apply, you're going to have to put forward a CV and a cover letter. And the aim of the CV and cover letter in this sense is to highlight the strengths that you already have, as we spoke about, your experience up to this point in tech, demonstrate your technical and your soft skills. Have you led initiatives, managed documentation, the things that are important to SRE, not just on a technical level, but on a supporting level. And then convey your interest in SRE. Like, it's important for somebody who's on the other end to understand why you are applying for this position. Do you even understand what SRE is? Like, I've been involved at times in the hiring process, and it becomes clear that a lot of people, quite fairly, because it's not spoken about as much as the other roles, don't actually know what SRE is. Perhaps some keywords, perhaps heard about it in passing, and so now they're applying. But it's really important that you understand what you're applying for. And cover letters aren't always necessary. I think later on in your career, you probably don't use them as much, but they can be very important when you are switching roles, because it applies additional context. You can answer that question about why you're moving into SRE from wherever you're coming from. The next stage is going to be like the initial screening. So you're going to be talking typically with someone from HR. Basically, you're not going to be talking to an SRE at this point, but that person there will have a checklist in front of them, right? So they're going to be looking for keywords, things like automation, things like SLOs and SLIs. And so this is your chance to demonstrate that you understand these things and get those kind of buzzwords there without using buzzwords. What should I say? The key terms and the key principles, and that you understand it, because they then can check that off and be like, okay, this is somebody that I'm willing to put forward to the SRE, the hiring manager, or so forth. This is where things can change. The order of things can change. Sometimes the technical interview first, the cultural interview second, but ultimately we'll go with the technical interview first. In technical interviews as an SRE, you're likely going to be given some sort of task. It's not always the case, but you may be asked to write or review some code, or automate something, or to design a system architecture, or solve a hypothetical issue. I've had a mixture of these before. I've had to write code before. I've had to do a systems architecture assessment. So I had to design in front of them an application, a 3-tier application for their hypothetical situation, and explain why I'd use certain resources in AWS and why I hadn't used others. And I've also had the case where I've had to solve an issue. I was actually given the company's website and said, use all the tools that are free on the internet in order to work out some of the issues that are happening with our website and how you may approach that. You want to focus on demonstrating your analytical skills, your coding ability, and your understanding of scalable and reliable systems. Right? All of these things coming together, and the importance of monitoring as well. What's really clear here, though, is that you also show your thought process and ask clarifying questions. And I know people say this a lot, but if we understand that everything in SRE is backed by data-driven decisions, even at this point, then you're highlighting that you understand the importance of getting relevant data. Even in a scenario like an interview, like you're already laying that foundation that you're that type of person who thinks in that type of way. Then you'll have the cultural interview. This is just to kind of layer on some of those things that you are the adaptable, collaborative person that we need in the SRE role, so that you're demonstrating those skills of empathy and commitment and continuous learning and improvement. Okay, so now let's move on to then what the next steps look like if you are thinking after this that, you know, I'm interested in SRE. Where do I go from here? Well, I would actually say if you are already in a tech job, or if you're thinking about a new position, start in that organization if you can. You don't have to start from scratch somewhere else. You can instead start with the place that you're already in. Use the people around you and the teams to get hands-on experience, right? If you're working as a software developer, spend some time with DevOps, ask to shadow work, look at the tickets on the board, and think about how you can contribute to those. Also have a free resource guide. So if you want to take a look at that, use that as a starting point. These are some of the resources that we use every day. So if you want to dive deeper into those and get an understanding and hands-on experience with those, use that to guide you. It's a little bit difficult with SRE because there aren't a ton of documentation around this is what you must learn. But this is a good starting point. You could also use this as a starting point as well. Some of the key skills that we've spoken about today and create your own learning plan around them. Feel free if you want to screenshot that or take that away with you and use that as your starting point. Here are some example resources that you may employ. I highly recommend this Site Reliability Engineering book. It's one of the ones that I've used and it's been extremely useful in my process and in becoming and developing as an SRE. If you have no cloud experience and you're leaning towards something like AWS, that's kind of the one that I specialize in with some GCP. Then try out the Cloud Practitioner learning pathway. It is free. You can access it there. If you've got no hands-on experience with things like Linux, try the Linux Foundation and all the courses that they have. So these are some of the resources that you can use. In terms of certificates, these are some of the ones you may be interested in. In terms of cloud, we have like the Cloud Practitioner, Leveling Up, we have Solutions Architect. If you're interested in getting certificates around infrastructure as code, then you may look at the Terraform Associate ones. If you're interested in containers, you can check out this particular list here. I also am taking a moment to plug my course, which is coming out in January of next year. So this is where I kind of go through a lot of the concepts that I've spoken about before. There's video where I speak about things like observability and monitoring, SLOs and SLIs, but also things like networking and the need to know basis. There's a mixture of resource types of things like videos, but also things like the written documentation so that you can kind of serve whatever learning style that you have. Some of them will be more idea-based or more conceptual-based, where others will go through actual code, for example, in this particular screen here, and actually showing what the code means and why we use that. There's also quizzes to kind of reinforce your knowledge and your learning, just to make sure that you're actually grasping these things and not just going through things. Also projects. I'm very big on projects. I think they solidify your learning, but they also allow you to build out a portfolio, right? So that you can show that to potential employers. And there's also some actual coding, Jupyter workbook, notebook, for you to go through and test code and play with code. So there are things to get on with there, but if you're interested, you've signed up to this, so there'll be some information coming out on that. Yeah. And that's pretty much everything. I will stop that there. Thank you for listening to me go on for about 45 minutes. But yeah, let's take a look at the questions. I'll stop sharing that. I think we've got some in the chat. Okay, I has said, is this the kind of job that you could end up being on call for? Yes. Yes, SRE is a job that typically you are on call rota for, and you're expected to be part of that when you join an SRE team. Often they'll explicitly say that in the process, that are you willing to be on call? And unless you don't want the job and you don't want to be on call, then you should probably answer yes. Is Linux also free? The particular one that I showed, I believe that is a free one, the Linux Introduction to Linux. But take a look, they have a mix of free and paid courses. Where can I download the resource guide? The same link that you used to sign up for this, you're able to just download the resource guide from there as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. How do I get access to the recording after? So I'm planning on putting this on YouTube, but also on my website. So again, assume that you've all accessed this using the link that you clicked on to sign up, then you'll be sent all this information after this. Is it related to incident management? Yes. If you want to, you can unmute yourself, I think. I'm not sure if you can, but generally speaking, yes, incident management is a part of SRE, right? So like when an incident occurs, you will have to respond and you'll have to be able to manage that incident, coordinate the different moving parts of the incident from the communication, triaging, which is when you're just trying to prioritize, work out what's going on. And is this a P1 high priority or is this maybe a P3? So yes, incident management is a huge part of it. In terms of mastering one of the languages, would JavaScript also be an adequate one to implement? It's a good point. JavaScript isn't one that I see used often for automating. However, if you have JavaScript, a background in JavaScript, that means you already understand some of the fundamentals around the languages. And in which case you may use some of that, but you also may be able to transition into Python or something else that we use with more ease, I would say. Platform engineering impact on SRE roles. It's a good point. When I see platform engineering roles, they do seem like an all-encompassing like SRE DevOps. I still see appetite for the SRE role. In all fairness, there are a lot of job openings. There are a lot of people who are still wanting to not just have platform engineers, or not just have DevOps engineers, but they actually are keen on the specific framework and way that SREs think. This is why the way that you think is as important as what you were able to do, because it will impact the way that you approach work and that you approach issues. Let's see what else. Can you share the link to the course recommendation? So this will all just be in, like I said, the video will be out and available for you to get afterwards. How can I sign up? I'm not sure if you mean the course or if you mean to this, but the course information will be sent out to everybody who's here, who's clicked the link, who signed up for this, and you got the email about this course, about the webinar. You also get the email about the course. Can I share my experience of being on call? What kind of problems did you solve and how long did it take? That's a very good question. It's giving me interview vibes. But on call can be a little bit nerve-wracking at the beginning because you're like, whoa, like if something goes wrong, it's down to me. Usually at the beginning, you're pairing with somebody who has more experience with the system, and there are escalation paths. But I'm trying to think of something that I've had to deal with. Usually it's around capacity. So like we have had an unexpected increase in traffic. That's happened before. And that's caused things to slow down. And therefore, it's scaling our resources out. There was also a time when we started to get a high number of errors. All of a sudden, it seemed like, but it tracked a release that we had. So it was about, in that kind of case, it was about when did this error rate start or this error rate spike? What was going on around this time? If I can't link it to things to do with infrastructure or something like this, were there any changes in our organization that happened at the time? Turned out, yes, we had a release into prod. Some things got missed and that was causing the issue. Roll back and work from there. Will your course teach how to script in Bash? Also, you yourself, what languages have you used mostly? I don't really use Bash. It is in the course though, because I think it's an important thing to understand. It doesn't go into it extensively and everything you can do Bash for. I personally am a Python user. I prefer Python and will use it when I can. I have some experience building with Java and JavaScript, but that is very far limited comparison to my Python experience. Cool. Evan said, based on today's presentation, it's like with an SRE, you'll be doing everything, some including architecting as well as systems. Can you tell me the difference between an SRE and a cloud architect? It's a very good point. It does feel like you're doing everything because you kind of are, in all fairness. Well, as a cloud architect, I think you are, for the most part, involved in architecting the solution in the kind of the build phase of the project. Say you're trying to build a cloud solution for your platform, your application, or you're trying to move into the cloud. The role of the architect is to ensure that transition can happen and they continue to optimize things on the platform, which is a little bit different to thinking about your application or your end user in production. Like I like to think about SRE as very, very much production focused. When things are live, we are there. I might not be as involved in when you was building this thing out and, you know, architecting your cloud solution at the beginning. I'm over here now. And if I need to tweak some things in the cloud and I need to understand things, that's sure. But everything, again, is with this application in mind and with the end user in mind. But again, there is so much overlap with these things because the SRE role requires so much knowledge. So I have some time for some more questions. What are some examples of some projects you recommend a junior DevOps engineer look into, strengthening the key technical skills that would eventually go into SRE work? I think I want to be focusing on things around observability and monitoring. So I don't know how much hands-on experience you have with that, but it would be a very good idea to start, maybe even in your own projects, building out the monitoring and alerting systems. There's a concept called monitoring as code. If you understand what infrastructure as code is, a very similar thing. Instead of building out a monitoring system by clicking on like the user interface, you declare your monitoring system as code, just as you would your infrastructure, just as you would your application code. So start building projects that show that you have an understanding of that. That's a good place to start, I think, in terms of interest in that. And start understanding the principles. Perhaps get that SRE book by O'Reilly and start looking into those fundamentals, and then you'll see how you can bring some of these principles into the work that you're doing. What else other questions do we have? I don't know if you already touched on this. Do you need a programming background to succeed as an SRE? Not necessarily. You don't have to be a programmer, or if you'd like a developer or an software engineer. It helps a lot because that's one less thing that you have to deal with later on. You have that background, and if you've been a Python developer, or if you've been a Java developer, again, you understand the fundamentals of programming, and so it makes the job a lot easier. By no means do you have to have a deep background, but you will have to plug to other places if you haven't. So like a DevOps engineer may not have been necessarily a Python developer or application developer, but they'll understand the applications. You need to understand how applications work in order to support them. But you can let your other things shine and kind of, you can add on to that. Like there is continuous learning. Like you don't start, by the way, being amazing at everything. Like if that was the case, that compensation I said would not be enough. If I was a Python developer at the top level, also system architect at the highest level, and all of these sorts of things evolve and grow. So yes. Next question is, we've got a couple more minutes. I'll try and answer a few more. I'm very much interested in SRE, but as a project manager, have you come across many SRE project managers, like any implementation managing changes? That's a good question. I've never heard SRE project manager. However, I have worked in teams where there is a delivery manager who I think describes the role that you are trying to get at. So they kind of coordinate things. This is especially true if you work in a consultancy and you have multiple clients, multiple projects, multiple tech stacks. That delivery manager can help coordinate the communication between the client and between the SREs, and also make sure that work is being managed effectively, changes are being effectively managed, implementation. So in that sense, yes. But if you search SRE project manager, you're probably going to see nothing, in all fairness. Okay, I was thinking of applying for boot camps like Code First. Would you recommend them to be a strong start into coding, as well as getting my foot in the door with SRE? I can't really endorse any boot camp that I haven't been to directly. I have heard good things about Code First Girls, and I think anything that allows you to structurally build out some of these skills is probably good, especially if you're not somebody who, could just go from that and build out your own course. Then perhaps something like that would be very useful. But yeah, I can't particularly endorse that because I haven't gone through that. Okay, kindly share a link to the registration. Some of us received just the meeting link. Okay. I'll do that in a moment. Thank you for answering my previous question. Do you work in sprints or long projects? I'm trying to understand if you get allocated task-wide tickets. It's another good question. In this particular job that I have, we don't work in sprints. Don't do like the Scrum kind of approach in that sense. But I have worked in places where we do work in short 2-week sprints. This is the work. We kind of have like an elongated time is just time. We fill it with tickets. There is different levels of structure that we put in place. But yeah, it varies. The actual ways of working will vary depending on the organization as well. And what would my is somebody, I don't know, somebody has a question that they're trying to ask because you're unmuted. Okay, that's fine. I'll continue. What did my training look like when I got started working in SRE? I trained as a cloud engineer. I did a boot camp that lasted about 3.5 months. I learned how to build applications, which is where a lot of my Java and JavaScript came from, that kind of experience, with the cloud in mind. and then spent a lot of time learning how to deploy these things into the cloud in the most optimal way with ideas of infrastructure. Use things like Terraform. Like I said, we built CI/CD pipelines. I'm trying to remember the exact one I used in my bootcamp. It might have been Circle CI. And yeah, that's what I remember from that. And then after that, I actually got my first job as an SRE, but it was kind of I was involved in something called QA, where they train you up and then they put you in jobs. The first job they offered me was IT support. I wasn't feeling the job description, so no. Then I came across this thing called SRE, and at that point I'd never heard of it. So it's not like I'd always wanted to be an SRE. I didn't even know what it was until this job description came in front of me, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. You do a lot of things, and the way my mind works, it stuck out to me. That's kind of how I got into it. And I spent those first kind of 6 months actually really getting to grips with what SRE is and what it meant, and I had that space to do it. And sometimes you'll have those jobs that allow that are open to more junior people, or open to, if you have other skills, you can come and learn the rest. It all depends on the organization and their needs at that time. And then T said, I've been in tech for a while. App support, could I use this sort of course to get up to speed? I think you can. I don't know exactly what your experience is, but if you've been in application support, then you have a lot of these fundamental things in experience, not even just in theory. You've actually been working with applications, I assume. You've been working on troubleshooting them. If you've been supporting them, then you understand the basic principles behind applications, and then thus how we can make them more reliable, becomes layering on and layering on.